Good evening. So, y'all already know what time it is. I'm sorry I always do this so late. Half of my people who watch my lives in the bed, about to get ready for work. But hey, this is when I have my free time. Um, what I want to chat with y'all about tonight is submission. Submission has become like a cuss word, particularly in female culture because of the implication that it has come with it, but also because of the rise of feminism. And I just want to talk about it because I was thinking to myself about how, yeah, women get upset about the idea of submission, like submitting to their husbands in particular, in relationship, just kind of, I ain't submitting to nobody. I only submit to God. I'm glad you said that, sis, because guess what? That is the beginning of submission, is submission to God, but God also calls us to submit to other people. And also that the concept of submission is not one that is unique to women, that it is a concept that is general to the Christian life, to walking with Lord, because first you will submit to God, and then God calls you to submit to other authorities in your life. And the reason why I wanted to talk about that was because, as a person who's been married and I'm reflecting on, my marriage and our relationship, we are moving into celebrating 6 years now of marriage. And like, what are some things that either I struggled with or didn't really have a robust understanding of before I got married. But also, even if you don't get married, you don't want to get married, like submission is a regular part of life. You will submit to regular authorities in your life, whether that be on your job, at your school, if you're an athlete, your coach. And so if you don't have a good understanding or grasp of this concept, or you don't accept it, you're going to struggle in every relationship in your life. And that's something that I really wanted to share because I feel like people are like, well, guess I'll be single, or, well, I don't think that that's what that passage is talking about. I don't think you can avoid it. Like when you see it in scripture, when Paul is talking, I believe that it's in Romans, to submit to your governing authorities. And I think the thing is crazy is he doesn't put conditions on submission. The same thing is true when he talks to wives. Wives, submit to your husbands. It doesn't say submit to your husbands if you marry a good man. He does everything you want him to do. And, he make a lot of money and therefore you should listen to him, or blah, 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 blah. It doesn't say if the government is the person that you voted in, you agree with all of their ideals, they do things that work out for you, and then you submit. No, it was submit to these people, one, for the governing side, because in the sovereignty of God, he put them there. And so he's using them for his purposes. And so your submission to them is actually obedience to him and trust in his control over the world. And then when it comes to your spouse, if you're talking about, a romantic relationship, that type of submission, it is also, again, your trust and confidence in God that you have agreed and chosen to marry a person that's worthy to follow. But also, hopefully, if you're a person who calls yourself a Christian, you're following someone who's following Jesus, right? And so your protection, because usually for me in particular, one of the reasons why submission was hard concept for me was because I'm just kind of like, I'm not going to put myself in a vulnerable position to be under somebody else's leadership. What if they lead me astray? What if they try to take advantage of me? What if they, are just not a capable person? Like they are not as smart as me. They don't, they're not as wise as me. Whatever it is, I'm just kind of like, I don't like the idea of that because I think I know everything. Or I think I can take care of myself better than another person can take care of me. Or they might have bad motives. And so I think that that's where it comes in. One, your pride, right? To believe that only your preferences and your ideas and your opinions matter more and should trump other people's. But also it shows a fear and a lack of trust in God, that if you truly surrender and submit in other relationships where there's other people who are in authority over you, or that you should yield to for things to work out, that you don't trust that God is going to take care of you. You're more concerned with the person than you are with God who is over that person and over your situation. And so I just was thinking to myself, man, like, we really struggle with submission, particularly women, because we think we're the only ones who have to submit. But in reality, everyone submits. Men submit, women submit, single people submit, married people submit. Like, submission is a regular part of life. And by submission, I just mean yielding to the leadership or the preferences of another person. Right. And this is where I'm gonna get it. This is where I'm gonna get y'all. Jesus submitted. Like, for me, that was where I couldn't argue anymore. I could argue for, are women really supposed to submit to their husbands? What if he's not a worthy leader? What if the government, is asking us to do immoral? Like, I had all of these arguments for how I could wiggle my way out of submission in other areas of life or whatever. But when I read the passage, and I believe it's in Colossians, I believe, or Philippians. I'll get y'all in the comments later. But when it talks about Jesus submitting himself to the Father, like talking about his incarnation and how he did not think of his position as something to be grasped, like, that really shook me, because I'm like, if Jesus, who is God, can submit, can yield, can put his own desires and preferences secondary to the Father in order that we might have salvation, why can't I grasp the concept of submitting in a marriage, submitting on a team, in a job, at a church? Like, why am I struggling? Who is not God, who is not perfect, right? Like, who doesn't know everything? Like, why am I struggling if Jesus didn't struggle? Like, if Jesus could do it and did do it, then I don't have an argument. I have no argument, and you have no argument. And so for me, that is where our arguing stops with submission. Submission is not a woman thing. It's not a married people thing. It's a believer thing. If you are a believer in Jesus Christ, submission is a part of your daily life. You are submitting to God. You are submitting to your governing authorities. If you're in a family, you're submitting to, if you're a child who lives with parents, you're submitting to your parents. Like, there is not a relationship or an arena in which you are not submitting as a Christian. So we need to stop allowing the ideas of the world, our own pride, to keep us, because this is the thing about submission. You are under the protection and provision of God when you're doing it. Because he's created these orders and because he is in control of them, like, we are most protected, we are most provided for when we are submitting and walking in the will of God, which it is his will for us to submit to these authorities that are in our lives, or these relationship, or these role, this status that we have. Like, we are most protected, most provided for when we are willfully submitting. But I just wanted to share that because I just know how I struggled with the concept, being a strong-willed woman, right? And thought it was unique to me being a woman and unique to me being married. But then I realized, as I began to study scripture more, that submission is not unique to me. It's not unique to women who are married. That every person, and even if you aren't a Christian, you're still going to have to submit to someone at some point. And so if we learn, right, to put submission in this right category in our brains, if we learn to humbly and willfully submit to the authorities in our life, and if we look to Jesus as being the greatest example of submission, right, because he had the highest position, because I think that's the other thing too, is like, to think about Jesus' submission is not like, oh, he was a great example. Like, he is, but the reason why it's such an amazing example is because of the position that he holds. Like, we think we hold some high position, but like, we're not God. He was God and submitted, lowered himself to show us how it should be done when we don't even come from a place of that amount of authority. And so for me, as somebody who thinks very highly of herself, God is still working on me. Y'all pray for me. To see the example of Christ, humbling himself, submitting, I no longer have an argument. I can't allow feminism, my own pride, nationalism, whatever, Republican, Democrat, like I can't allow those things to keep me from, one, being under the protection and provision of God, because he's called me to submit, but also to think that I am above Christ, that I can't submit if he did it. And so I want you to think about that. I want you to think about, where am I struggling with submission in my life? Have I struggled with it? If I'm a woman, have I thought that it was unique to women, unique to being married? And if I'm a man, am I humbly submitting to the authorities in my life? And also, if people are going to have to submit to you, like if you plan to get married, like, are you a great leader? Right? Where people don't feel like, oh, I'm submitting to this sucky person. And, sometimes people's opinions don't matter. But also, just like, my submission to God is willful because I know that he has my best interest at heart. And I think that's some people's problem with submission is like, you don't trust the people that you have to submit to. You don't think that they have great character, but God has perfect character. He has demonstrated that to us in his love to send his son to die for us, but he's demonstrated to you probably in more ways than you can even count that he is worthy, he is trustworthy to be submitted to. And if he's calling you to submit to someone else because of his character, you should be willing to do it. And so that's a word for me. As I said, I can be prideful, I can be arrogant, I could just be a contrarian. And so if you're like me and you need somebody to encourage you and remind you that submission is not unique to your situation, your season of life, your gender, and that Christ did it, I think that it will challenge our hearts to do it willfully, joyfully, and trusting in the character of God because he's worthy. Y'all have a good night. I'm about to go wash these dishes.